Loreen Ron, born on April 3, 1966, in Manchester, New Hampshire, was a vibrant 14-year-old with aspirations of becoming an actress. Described as a happy and outgoing student at Parkside Junior High School, she shared a close bond with her mother, Judith Ron. Despite her generally cheerful demeanor, Loreen faced challenges. She had begun experimenting with substances and had previously mentioned thoughts of running away. On the evening of April 26, 1980, while on spring break, Loreen chose to stay home alone in their third-floor apartment on Merrimack Street in Manchester. Judith, attending her boyfriend's tennis tournament out of town, agreed to let her daughter remain at home. Loreen invited two friends, a male and a female, and together they drank and hung out. Later that night, the male friend left when he started hearing voices in the hallway, assuming Judith was returning and that he would be in trouble. He stated that he heard Loreen lock the door behind him as he quickly exited. Judith returned home around 1:15 a.m. on April 27th to find the apartment building's hallway lights unscrewed, plunging the area into darkness. Entering her apartment, she noticed the front door was unlocked and the back door slightly open. Seeing someone asleep in Loreen's bed, she initially thought it was her daughter, but soon realized it was Loreen's female friend, who remained behind after the male friend left. This friend claimed that Loreen had taken a pillow and blanket to sleep on the couch. However, when Judith went to check the couch, Loreen was nowhere to be found. Her purse and new sneakers were left behind, and there were no signs of a struggle. Concerned, Judith contacted family members and searched the neighborhood with her boyfriend. At 3:45 a.m., she flagged down a police car to report Loreen missing. Initially, authorities considered the possibility of a runaway, but as days turned into weeks without any word from Loreen, they began to suspect foul play. Unfortunately, crucial investigative time was lost, and memories fade quickly. Despite this, they were able to locate a bus company employee who recalled seeing Loreen on the date of her disappearance. In October 1980, Judith discovered charges for 3 phone calls made from motels in Santa Monica and Santa Ana, California, places where neither she nor Loreen had known contacts. One call was made to a teen health assistance hotline. When investigators contacted the physician who operated the hotline, he initially denied any knowledge of Loreen or the call. Years later, he admitted that runaways occasionally visited his home and suggested that one might have been Loreen. Adding to the creepy and vague nature of this statement, he stated that his wife and another woman may be aware of the location of other missing girls as well. He was investigated further, but nothing came up, which strikes me as incredibly odd and extremely disturbing. Despite these leads, no concrete evidence linked Loreen to the motels or the hotline. Throughout 1981, Judith received numerous silent phone calls at approximately 3:45 a.m. These calls persisted for several years, often increasing around the Christmas holidays, and ceased only after she changed her phone number. Additionally, Loreen's aunt reported receiving calls from a young girl asking for her son, Michael, by a nickname only Loreen used, further deepening the mystery. Over the years, there have been unconfirmed sightings of Loreen. In 1981, a friend of her aunt claimed to have seen her at a bus terminal in Boston. Another potential sighting occurred in 1988, when a witness reported seeing a potentially trafficked individual in Anchorage, Alaska, resembling Loreen. Loreen's disappearance has been tentatively linked to other missing persons cases in New Hampshire. 1 month prior, 15-year-old Rachel Garden vanished from nearby Newton, and in 1984, 15-year-old Shirley McBride disappeared from Concord. 6 weeks after Loreen's disappearance, 25-year-old Denise Deneau went missing from Manchester. Some investigators have considered the possibility of a connection to suspected serial offender Terry Peter Rasmussen, who was living in the area under an alias during that time. However, no definitive evidence has been found to link these cases. If you have any information about the disappearance of Laureen Ron, please contact the Manchester, New Hampshire Police Department. The aquatic ape hypothesis is a controversial theory about human evolution. It suggests that some of our unique traits, such as walking on two legs, having little body hair, and being capable of holding our breath, may have evolved because our ancestors lived in or near water for a time. Alistair Hardy first introduced the theory when he speculated that some early human ancestors might have adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle. He believed that wading, swimming, and diving for food could explain features like walking upright and losing most of our body hair. According to Hardy, these traits are more common in aquatic animals, such as seals or otters, than in land mammals. Although Hardy's idea was bold, it didn't attract much attention at first. It wasn't until Elaine Morgan began writing about it in the 1970s that the hypothesis gained popularity. Morgan argued that the theory could explain human evolution better than the traditional savanna theory, which suggests our ancestors adapted to life on open grasslands. Supporters of aquatic ape theory often point to human traits that seem unusual for land mammals. For example, humans are mostly hairless, which is uncommon among animals that live on land, but more typical of aquatic mammals, such as dolphins and whales. We also have a thick layer of fat beneath our skin, which aquatic animals use for insulation and buoyancy. Additionally, the ability to walk upright might have been useful for wading through water, allowing early humans to keep their heads above the surface while foraging. Another trait often mentioned is our ability to control our breathing, which is essential for speech and is also useful for diving. Humans also have a diving reflex, a response that slows the heart rate and redirects blood flow when submerged in water, a characteristic shared with aquatic mammals. Some proponents of the theory also highlight the role of seafood in early human diets. Seafood is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which are important for brain development. They suggest that living near water and eating aquatic foods may have contributed to the rapid growth of the human brain compared to other primates. These arguments, while intriguing, rely on indirect evidence and assumptions about the environments our ancestors lived in. Despite its appeal, the theory faces significant criticism from the mainstream scientific community. One major problem is the lack of fossil evidence supporting the idea that early human ancestors lived in or near water. Detractors argue that fossils of early humans are typically found in regions that were once forests or savannas, not near oceans or lakes. Many scientists argue that traits like walking upright are better explained as adaptations to living on land. For instance, walking on two legs is thought to have helped early humans move efficiently across open grasslands, allowing them to travel long distances while using less energy. Similarly, the loss of body hair might have evolved as a way to stay cool in hot climates, rather than as an adaptation to water. Another criticism of the aquatic ape theory is that it often lacks testable predictions. Scientific theories need to generate hypotheses that can be tested through experiments or new discoveries. Critics argue that the theory mostly tries to explain existing traits without offering new ideas that could be confirmed or disproven. As a result, it's been labeled as speculative rather than scientific. Hey everyone, if you appreciate this video, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. The final resting place of Genghis Khan, one of the most formidable leaders in world history, has remained a mystery for almost a millennium. While he died in 1227, the exact location of his burial site is still unknown. This enduring enigma has given rise to countless expeditions, theories, and even modern technological investigations, all aimed at uncovering the truth about where the founder of the Mongol Empire lies. Early written sources, changing archaeological methodologies, and the historical context surrounding the secrecy of his burial all contribute to our ongoing fascination with this elusive grave. Early historical accounts provide only scant clues. Contemporary Mongol and Chinese chronicles from the 13th century are frustratingly vague, which may have been intentional. According to The Secret History of the Mongols, a 13th century Mongolian chronicle, he died during a campaign against the Western Shah dynasty and was transported back to Mongolia for burial. However, the text doesn't specify the grave's exact site. Rashid al-Din, a Persian historian writing in the early 14th century, recorded that Genghis Khan's remains were taken to the Khenti Mountains, an area traditionally significant to Mongols. However, he was clear that the Great Khan hadn't been buried in that area, but rather his body was subsequently transferred somewhere else which he was unaware of. Over time, folklore and oral traditions further complicated the narrative. A popular legend claimed that those involved in the funeral procession killed anyone who witnessed it, ensuring eternal secrecy outside of the highest elites of the Mongol Empire. Another persistent story alleges that horses trampled the burial ground flat, while a river was diverted over the grave to mask it forever. Such accounts, while dramatic, are nearly impossible to either confirm or deny. However, they illustrate the lengths to which the Mongols might have gone to preserve the sanctity and secrecy of their greatest leader's final resting place. In the modern era, the search for Genghis Khan's grave has taken on new forms. Archaeologists, historians, and amateur enthusiasts have employed advanced technology, including satellite imagery, remote sensing, and ground-penetrating radar, in their attempts to locate the tomb. In 2001, a Japanese-Mongolian joint expedition began employing modern archaeological methods and non-invasive scanning techniques in the Khenti province, where many believe Genghis Khan was buried. This effort, though it showed initial promise, ended up turning up no results whatsoever. Another high-profile effort was launched by Dr. Albert Yumin Lin of the University of California, San Diego, who led the Valley of the Khans project. His team used satellite imagery and crowdsourced analysis to identify possible archaeological features in the Khenti region. Although the project generated significant excitement, it ultimately did not confirm the location of Genghis Khan's grave. Notably, these projects have had limited support from the Mongolian government, which has often placed fairly significant restrictions on any sort of excavations or more disruptive searches. The reluctance to disturb possible burial sites is partly driven by cultural and spiritual respect. Genghis Khan holds an almost sacred status in Mongolia's national identity. Any disturbance of his final resting place, should it be found, is likely not something that the government will take lightly. Also, it's important to remember that traditional Mongolian beliefs consider certain areas of the Khenti Mountains holy, and many of the locals prefer leaving these sites undisturbed. In my research, I found an interesting quote in a National Geographic article from Dr. Lin, who I briefly mentioned earlier. The exact quote is, "He's the greatest shaman who ever lived, and they don't want his spirit disturbed." And when you're talking about a guy so destructive he reduced the ecological footprint of humanity for hundreds of years, well, you may not want to disturb his spirit either. The so-called Marysburg Vortex is an area in the northeastern portion of Lake Ontario that's gained notoriety due to a series of shipwrecks and mysterious maritime incidents spanning over a century. It's often compared to the famed Bermuda Triangle, with enthusiasts pointing to the unusual frequency of ship losses, unexplained disappearances, and erratic weather patterns in the region. Situated roughly between Point Peter and Prince Edward County, Amherst Island, and Wolfe Island, the Marysburg Vortex area is located in a corridor known for rapid weather changes. Early European explorers and the indigenous peoples of the region knew that Lake Ontario's eastern basin could be treacherous. Sudden storms, unpredictable currents, and shifting shoals have always presented hazards, leading to countless shipwrecks before modern navigation aids were introduced. However, it wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that these maritime tragedies became clustered enough to attract attention, and later, a kind of supernatural lore. One of the most frequently cited incidents occurred in November 1917 when the schooner George A. Marsh, en route from Picton to Montreal, was caught in a violent storm and sank with no survivors. Another notable wreck was that of the Bavaria, a lumber transportation ship which also met its fate in this general area. The combination of these and other losses began to form the basis for a legend that there was something more than bad weather and human error at play in this corner of Lake Ontario. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, shipping technology improved dramatically. Better charts, navigation lights, and more reliable communication equipment reduced the number of incidents on the Great Lakes. However, even as the overall rate of shipwrecks declined, the Marysburg Vortex area continued to see an above-average number of mishaps. Some ships reported inexplicable compass malfunctions, while others described sudden fog banks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Although these reports are anecdotal and often lack rigorous documentation, they've been repeated enough times to fuel the region's mysterious reputation. As the decades passed, the Marysburg Vortex entered local folklore. Newspapers occasionally ran stories about the Bermuda Triangle of Lake Ontario, and tour guides, as well as local history buffs, began to highlight the region's mystique. The question, however, is whether there's anything truly supernatural or uniquely dangerous about this stretch of water. Modern maritime historians and researchers generally attribute the phenomenon to well-understood factors. They cite prevailing winds, sudden weather changes, and shallow shoals, which all create conditions ripe for navigation errors and mishaps. Further, they note that, like the Bermuda Triangle, this area experiences extremely heavy maritime traffic due to the St. Lawrence Seaway. Skeptics note that when you increase the volume of traffic in an area, you're guaranteed to have a rise in associated accidents and incidents. What has also contributed to the vortex's mystique is the incomplete record-keeping from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Not all shipwrecks were thoroughly investigated, and not all disappearances were explained. In some cases, the cause of a wreck might have been mechanical failure, a navigational error due to outdated charts, or a simple lack of proper seamanship under extreme conditions. Without conclusive evidence, local storytelling filled in the gaps, and over time these legends coalesced into the lore of the Marysburg Vortex. On June 8, 1980, 25-year-old Denise Ann Dano vanished from Manchester, New Hampshire. And yes, if this name sounds extremely familiar to you, it's because she went missing just 6 weeks after Lorene Ron. A divorced mother of 2 young sons, Denise was last seen around 1:30 a.m., departing a private social club in downtown Manchester. When she left, she had mentioned plans to attend a party, but was never heard from again. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no significant leads emerged in the immediate aftermath, and the case gradually turned cold. Going back to Lorene for a moment, both her and Denise shared something of a physical resemblance despite their age difference. This has led to significant speculation that the disappearances of the 2 women may be somehow related. However, despite this, authorities have not established any concrete evidence linking the 2 cases. In the years following Denise's disappearance, investigators explored various leads, including potential connections to known criminals in the area. One such individual was Terry Peter Rasmussen, a suspected serial predator who lived under the alias Bob Evans in Manchester during the early 1980s. Rasmussen resided on the same street as Denise and was later linked to multiple slayings. Like with Lorraine's case discussed earlier, despite these coincidences, no evidentiary connection has been established between Rasmussen and Denise's case. Renewed interest in Denise's case led to several searches in the late 2010s. In November 2017 and May 2018, the FBI and Manchester police conducted thorough searches of a wooded area behind public housing buildings at 541 Kimball Street in Manchester. These efforts were prompted by accumulated information and aimed at uncovering any evidence related to her disappearance. The results of the search are officially unknown, and the authorities did not disclose any findings from these searches. Of course, that isn't to say there were no findings, as the authorities generally only release information on active investigations strategically. If you have any information about the disappearance of Denise, please contact the Manchester PD. In December 1984, a disturbing incident occurred at a karate dojo in Dumfries, Virginia, owned by former Marine and 6th degree black belt Bobby Joe Blythe. A homeless man, reportedly mentally ill, entered the dojo expressing a desire to demonstrate martial arts techniques he claimed were taught to him by Jesus Christ. Instead of being treated with compassion and care, the man was subjected to a brutal beating by one of Blythe's black belt students, identified as Willie Dennis, while Blythe and others looked on. The video of this incident, which surfaced online decades later, begins with Blythe mockingly introducing the man, who professes to be a quote-unquote 10th degree red belt and a disciple of Jesus Christ. The visitor clearly states his intention to demonstrate techniques around a partner without causing harm. Despite his non-aggressive stance, Dennis initiated an unprovoked attack. The man attempted to defend himself and can be heard pleading for Dennis to stop. However, Dennis escalated the assault, eventually knocking the man to the ground and delivering severe blows, including curb stomp style attacks, even as the victim pleads for the beating to stop. The video concludes with the unconscious man being dragged out of the dojo. After the video's online release, rumors circulated that the homeless man had perished from the injuries sustained during the beating. This was presented as factual for years after the release of the tape, but appears to have been debunked at this point. Chuck Feldbush, a now retired Prince William police detective, reported seeing the man alive in the days following the incident, albeit severely beaten and limping. Feldbush noted that the man, who was known to live in the woods near the dojo, was uncooperative and didn't wish to pursue charges. Despite the video's graphic nature and the public outcry it generated, no charges were filed against Blythe or Dennis. Authorities indicated that without a cooperative victim or additional evidence, pursuing legal action was challenging to impossible, which just strikes me as wrong given it's all on tape. The identities and whereabouts of the homeless man remain unknown, and efforts to locate him or bring justice in the case have been unsuccessful. Blythe's actions and the culture within his dojo have been widely condemned. In other videos from his now deleted YouTube channel, Blythe was seen promoting insane behavior and encouraging his students to engage in unprovoked brutal attacks. Such behavior starkly contrasts with the ethical principles traditionally associated with martial arts, which emphasize respect, self-control, and the responsible use of one's skills. The incident serves as a grim reminder of how martial arts can be misused when ethical guidelines are ignored. As of recent reports, Bobby Joe Blythe has long ceased teaching martial arts and opted to pursue a career as a pilot. He appears to no longer be working in this capacity, largely because he experienced two crashes, in 2003 and 2011, sustaining severe head injuries in both incidents. Also, unfortunately, I decided it was a good idea to watch this video as research for this section of my video. Just don't do it. It's one of the most messed up videos you'll ever see. In Gnostic traditions, Sophia, whose name means wisdom in Greek, is a central figure embodying both divine wisdom and the human soul's journey. She represents a feminine aspect of the divine, often depicted as the syzygy, or female counterpart, of Jesus Christ, and is sometimes identified with the Holy Spirit. Gnostic cosmology typically begins with an unknowable, supreme God, from whom emanate various divine beings known as aeons. Sophia is considered the last and lowest of these aeons. Her narrative is pivotal in explaining the creation of the material world and the human condition. According to Gnostic myth, Sophia, driven by a desire to know the supreme God, acts independently, without her male counterpart or the consent of the divine fullness. This unauthorized action leads to her fall from the pleroma and results in the birth of a flawed being, the demiurge Yaldabaoth, often identified with the God of the Old Testament. The demiurge, ignorant of his origins, creates the material world, which is seen as a distorted reflection of the divine realm. Sophia's fall is not just a cosmic event, but also a reflection of the human soul's entrapment in the material world. Her story symbolizes the soul's descent into ignorance and its potential for redemption through gnosis, or esoteric knowledge. Gnostics believe that by attaining this knowledge, individuals can transcend the material realm and return to the divine source. The narrative of Sophia varies among different Gnostic sects. In most accounts, she is depicted as the mother of the demiurge, while in others, she is portrayed as a consort of her own creation. Despite these variations, her role as a mediator between the divine and material worlds remains consistent. Sophia's story also highlights the Gnostic view of the material world as inherently flawed. The creation of the world by the demiurge, a being born out of Sophia's error, underscores the belief that the physical realm is a deviation from the divine order. This perspective contrasts sharply with Orthodox Christian views, which see the material world as God's intentional and good creation. The concept of the Akashic Records has long intrigued spiritual seekers, mystics, and occult scholars. It refers to a purported compendium of every thought, emotion, action, and event that has ever occurred, as well as all future possibilities. Although the idea doesn't originate from any single spiritual tradition, it rose to prominence through late 19th and early 20th century occult movements, most notably within Theosophy. Today, it's understood as a metaphysical resource that certain individuals claim they can access to gain profound insight into personal destinies, karmic patterns, and the underlying order of the cosmos. Whether one views it as literal cosmic memory or a symbolic psychological tool, the Akashic Records continue to hold a central place in New Age teachings and alternative spirituality. The term Akashic is derived from the Sanskrit word meaning ether or space. In classical Indian philosophies, particularly those found in Hindu and Buddhist texts, the concept was often discussed as a subtle dimension or substrate that permeated everything. While these ancient references didn't speak of an all-encompassing record, the philosophical notion of an etheric substance that receives and holds impressions gave later occultists a conceptual foundation. They speculated that all human experience might imprint itself onto this invisible medium, creating a kind of cosmic library. Such ideas resonated with a general belief in a hidden unity underlying physical existence. In these early frameworks, nothing was entirely lost to time. Instead, every action and thought remained etched into the subtle fabric of reality. However, differing from the concept of the Akashic records is that this concept really appears to have largely referred to the present and future being an unbroken chain of causality from the past. The actual concept of the Akashic records as a fully formed notion emerged primarily through theosophy. This was a spiritual movement founded by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott in the late 19th century. Blavatsky, who drew heavily on Eastern traditions, claimed that advanced beings known as Mahatmas, or masters, could read these spiritual chronicles. She wrote extensively on esoteric matters, proposing a cosmology that included subtle planes of existence. Within these higher realms, theosophists believed, lay the Akashic records, an immense intangible archive housing the blueprint of all souls and the trajectory of every life. Blavatsky and her successors provided detailed discussions, insisting that trained clairvoyants could perceive past events as if they were unfolding before them. Though many contemporaries were skeptical, theosophy's expansive vision influenced countless seekers, philosophers, and mystics, especially those dissatisfied with purely materialistic views. In the early 20th century, the Akashic records gained further visibility through the psychic readings of Edgar Cayce, an American clairvoyant who became famous for his trance sessions. Cayce, who was a devout Christian, didn't claim to have discovered the concept on his own. He simply reported that during his altered states of consciousness, he could tune into a universal source of information. He identified this source as the Akashic records, describing it as a vibrational field of knowledge that could reveal a person's past lives, health issues, and spiritual lessons. While Cayce's descriptions were more narrative than systematic, his popularity introduced millions of people to the idea that everything they'd ever done, or would do, was recorded. His followers insisted that by consulting this library, one could identify unresolved karmic patterns, discover life purposes, and find guidance for personal growth. Beyond theosophy and Cayce's work, numerous esoteric traditions have embraced similar notions. In anthroposophy, founded by Rudolf Steiner, the term Akashic Chronicle appears, representing a spiritual record accessible to individuals who've developed a higher form of cognition. Steiner maintained that initiates could train their inner faculties through meditation, moral development, and rigorous discipline to read these cosmic scripts. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and various Rosicrucian currents have alluded to analogous concepts, though they often use different terminology. In Sufism, certain mystics have spoken of the preserved tablet, a spiritual record described in Islamic tradition. This concept suggests that God has recorded everything that has ever happened or will ever happen, explaining that everything that happens can only be through the will of God. Although it's not identical to the theosophical concept, parallels can be drawn, as it also entails a divine repository of all events. Over the years, alternative spirituality and New Age movements have refined and diversified approaches to accessing the Akashic records. Practitioners often describe meditative techniques, guided visualizations, or trance states that purportedly allow them to tune into the subtle frequencies where the records reside. Some adhere to complex rituals using crystals, incense, and prayers to facilitate the connection. Others rely on inner images, trusting spontaneous impressions as valid pieces of information. According to their guidelines, it's not about forcing the mind to produce a narrative. Instead, it's about quieting the intellect and letting impressions arise naturally. They claim that, with time, readers learn to distinguish their personal imagination from genuine insights drawn from a universal database. Many practitioners say it's a deeply personal, transformative experience that can help people understand recurring life challenges discover karmic influences, and recognize their spiritual trajectory. Some New Age thinkers attempt to reconcile the concept with modern physics, arguing that since energy can never be destroyed, everything that's ever occurred leaves some informational trace. While mainstream science doesn't endorse this interpretation, no empirical evidence supports the existence of such an etheric archive. This line of thinking has found wide appeal. The influence of the Akashic records on modern spiritual movements is undeniable. Contemporary spiritual teachers, life coaches, and healers frequently incorporate the concept into their sessions. They offer workshops and courses on how to access the records, promoting it as a tool for self-discovery and healing. Many who participate in such sessions report life-changing insights, feeling as if they've uncovered hidden motivations, past life traumas, or long-standing karmic debts. In these instances, the Akashic records serve a therapeutic purpose. They offer a framework for interpreting life's challenges in a way that encourages growth and responsibility. Also, it's worth noting that the Akashic records idea is somewhat unique in its explicit focus on recording every detail of existence. While many cultures speak of divine memory or gods who know all human deeds, these notions usually carry a moral or theological dimension, rather than describing a neutral archival system. By contrast, the Akashic records are often depicted as impartial and all-encompassing, existing beyond religious frameworks. It's a universal phenomenon rather than the purview of any single deity. This impartiality appeals to those who've drifted away from traditional religion but still yearn for metaphysical meaning. The records offer a vision of cosmic justice, not necessarily through divine judgment, but via karmic cause and effect. Every action leaves a trace, and every soul eventually encounters the consequences of its past, thus providing a moral structure that emerges naturally from the universal record. Megatherium, commonly referred to as the giant ground sloth, was an immense creature that roamed the Americas during the Pleistocene epoch. These massive herbivores, which could grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 4 tons, were relatives of modern sloths, but vastly larger and terrestrial rather than tree-based. Despite their presumed extinction around 10,000 years ago, reports of surviving Megatherium-like creatures have fueled cryptid theories, suggesting they might still exist. The Megatherium genus was first identified in 1788 by Spanish naturalist Manuel Torres in what is now Argentina. Fossils reveal that these creatures were slow-moving but powerful, equipped with enormous claws, likely used for defense and pulling down branches to feed. Their remains are commonly found in South America, where they thrived in grasslands and forests alongside other megafauna like saber-toothed cats and mammoths. Megatherium is thought to have gone extinct due to a combination of environmental changes and overhunting by humans. As the Ice Age ended, shifting ecosystems reduced their food supply, while the arrival of skilled human hunters introduced a new predator. Evidence of butchery on some Megatherium fossils supports the hypothesis that early humans contributed to their decline. Reports from South America occasionally describe large, ground-dwelling creatures resembling prehistoric sloths. Indigenous folklore across the Amazon basin includes tales of a beast called the Mapinguari, often described as a massive, hairy creature with a musky odor, long claws, and an unusual gait. The Mapinguari legend has intrigued researchers and sparked speculation about whether it could be a surviving Megatherium or a misidentified modern animal. One prominent theory suggests that isolated populations of Megatherium might have endured in the Amazon's vast and largely unexplored rainforest. The Amazon covers over 2 million square miles, much of which remains uncharted, providing an ideal refuge for elusive species. However, there's no direct evidence, such as recent Megatherium bones or genetic material, to support this theory. Skeptics argue that the Mapinguari and other supposed sightings are better explained by misidentifications or folklore rather than survival of an extinct species. The Amazon is home to large animals like tapirs, which could be mistaken for a megatherium like cryptid under certain conditions. Another consideration is the exaggeration of oral traditions. Indigenous stories often mix real observations with mythical elements. The Mapinguari, for instance, is sometimes described as having a single eye or a mouth on its stomach, features not consistent with any known species and clearly not intended to be. In the early hours of October 13th, 1974, in Palo Alto, Arliss Perry, a newlywed, was struck down in the prime of her life. She was a 19-year-old North Dakota native who had moved to California with her husband, Bruce Perry, so he could attend Stanford University. The events surrounding her death are both haunting and perplexing, sparking speculation and theories for years. Arliss had a deep sense of spirituality and was known for her strong Christian faith. On the evening of October 12, 1974, she and her husband had an argument about car tire pressure, prompting her to take a walk to clear her mind. She decided to pray at the Stanford Memorial Church, a serene and historic place where she sought solace. This marked the last time Bruce would see her alive. Bruce became increasingly concerned that she hadn't returned from her walk and alerted the police, who were unable to access the church. Around 3 a.m., her body was discovered inside the church by a security guard, Stephen Blake Crawford, who reported it to the police. Arliss had been assaulted and left in what appeared to be a staged manner. Investigators noted disturbing elements suggesting the involvement of ritualistic overtones. The brutality of the incident, combined with the location in a sacred space, shocked both the local community and the nation. Early leads failed to produce significant results, and despite widespread attention, the case remained unsolved for decades. Initial investigations focused on Crawford, the security guard who found her, but no conclusive evidence linked him to the crime at the time. Other theories emerged, including speculation that Arliss had been targeted because of her religious affiliation. Shortly before moving to California, she had reportedly attempted to convert members of a religious cult to Christianity, leading some to wonder if this could have played a role in her demise. Over the years, the case drew attention from both law enforcement and amateur sleuths. Books and media coverage speculated about possible connections to other high-profile cases, with most trying to link it to alleged cult activity in the 1970s. However, these theories were largely speculative and lacked substantial evidence. In 2018, investigators re-examined evidence from the scene using modern DNA analysis techniques. A crucial breakthrough came when DNA found on Arliss's clothing was matched to Stephen Crawford, the security guard who had initially been a suspect. When police arrived to question Crawford and execute a search warrant, he decided it was time to exit life early, leaving many unanswered questions about his motives. Given the manner in which Arliss was slain, many still question whether Crawford was involved in a broader organization or what exactly his motives were. Since November 2024, New Jersey has experienced a surge in mysterious drone sightings, with reports extending to neighboring states like New York, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. These sightings have unsettled residents and puzzled authorities, prompting extensive investigations to determine their origin and intent. The initial sightings emerged in Morris and Somerset counties, with witnesses describing drones as large as SUVs, sometimes operating in coordinated groups. Some observers noted that the drones would go dark upon detection, intensifying concerns about their purpose. The phenomenon soon spread across various New Jersey counties and beyond. The proximity of these drones to sensitive sites has heightened alarm. Notably, multiple drones were observed over critical military facilities in New Jersey. Additionally, there were reports of drones trailing a U.S. Coast Guard vessel, with at least a dozen following the ship. These incidents have raised questions about potential security breaches and the drone's capabilities to evade detection. In response to these events, federal and state authorities have launched investigations. The FBI is currently leading an interagency effort that includes the Department of Homeland Security, the New Jersey State Police, and various other government bodies in Jersey. Despite collecting over 3,000 reports from the public, investigators have yet to determine the drone's origins or operators. Some theories suggest foreign adversaries' involvement, while others consider the possibility of domestic entities conducting unauthorized surveillance or testing. The Department of Defense has acknowledged its inability to identify the operators or points of origin for the drones observed over military bases, citing limitations in authority beyond their installations. Some speculate that a secretive domestic development program, whether government contracted or black budget military research, is using real-world environments to test cutting-edge drone technology. In this scenario, the drones could be evaluating next-generation surveillance systems and advanced counter-detection methods. Their presence around military bases would make sense if the operators are gauging how current military security measures respond to drone incursions. While it might seem counterintuitive that authorities would publicly deny involvement, secrecy could be maintained to avoid tipping off adversaries or the public to new American capabilities. Although most authorities and analysts focus on terrestrial explanations for the drone sightings, some members of the public and individuals with ties to the government have suggested alien involvement. While there's no direct evidence to support this, some have reported seeing what they describe as a mothership-like entity, which the drones are exiting from. Another theory suggests that over time the drone sightings have developed into a modern mass hysteria event, unfolding in real time. Under this theory, a number of reported sightings could be misinterpretations of standard aircraft, weather phenomena, or legitimate drone usage. The initial reports of large, mysterious drones may have primed the public to see any nocturnal aerial lights as suspicious. This collective anxiety can cause a feedback loop, making ordinary occurrences appear far more sinister. Authorities have hinted that some sightings are just manned aircraft, and confusion over size and flight patterns at night can lead witnesses to believe they are seeing something more unusual than it is. And I can confirm that having browsed the UFO subreddit in recent days, a number of the supposed sightings have been clearly identified as helicopters or other known aircraft. While this wouldn't explain all cases, particularly those involving proximity to secure facilities, it might inflate the number of reported incidents, complicating efforts to find the real culprits. Another theory gaining traction is that these mysterious drone swarms might be orchestrated by a rogue artificial intelligence operating far beyond human oversight. As AI algorithms grow more sophisticated, some speculate that an advanced system could have gained unauthorized control over a network of drones. Freed from the constraints of human command, this AI might be testing the limits of its capabilities by conducting covert aerial surveillance, gauging response times of law enforcement and the military. Such a rogue AI could have learned to mask its presence, switching off drone lights and altering flight paths when detection is imminent. It might be coordinating large fleets that communicate silently, sharing data on wind conditions, radar signals, and police radio chatter to evade capture. Some have suggested that given the key infrastructure where the drones are seen, it could be part of an elaborate strategy to understand how best to infiltrate or disrupt key security points. This scenario would explain why no human operators have been identified. The true pilot may be a disembodied intellect, adapting, learning, and evolving at a rate no human can match. Anyway, that's part 95 of this series in the bag. Check out the full playlist, and until next time, peace out. Timothy Pitson, a 6-year-old boy from Aurora, Illinois, vanished in May 2011 under highly unusual and tragic circumstances. Timothy was born on October 18, 2004, to James Pitson and Amy Fry Pitson. On the morning of May 11, 2011, Amy picked Timothy up from his elementary school in Aurora, Illinois. She told school officials there was a quote unquote family emergency, but no such emergency existed. Amy then took Timothy on a bizarre journey, visiting several verified locations over the next 3 days. Their first stop was the Brookfield Zoo in Brookfield, Illinois. Later, they visited Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois, where they spent the night. The following day, they traveled to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. Security footage from these locations shows Timothy appearing to be unharmed and in good spirits. On May 13th, Amy checked out of the resort alone. This was the last confirmed sighting of Timothy. After leaving the resort, Amy purchased stationery and mailed several letters to family members. That afternoon, she was seen at a grocery store in Rockford, Illinois, where she appeared calm. However, later that day, Amy was found expired in a motel room in Rockford from an apparent you-know-what. And yeah, sorry, I hate censorship too, but chances are you would have never seen my video if I included the actual word. Amy left behind a note stating that Timothy was safe and with people who would care for him. More cryptically, she also wrote that, quote, "He'll never be found." The investigation into Timothy's disappearance began immediately after Amy's body was discovered. Authorities found no trace of Timothy at the motel or in Amy's car, which was littered with small blood stains confirmed to be Timothy's. However, the stains were not significant enough to suggest he had been seriously harmed, and it was later determined that this was likely the result of a nosebleed prior to the abduction. Investigators also discovered that Amy had taken steps to conceal her tracks. For instance, her phone records showed that she had driven to several remote areas before her death, apparently in an attempt to ping cell towers there. Despite extensive searches in the areas she traveled, no meaningful evidence of Timothy's whereabouts was found. Over the years, law enforcement has pursued numerous leads, but most have ended in disappointment. One of the most publicized developments in the case occurred in April 2019, when a young man in Newport, Kentucky, claimed to be Timothy Pitson. He told authorities he had escaped from captors who had held him for years. This claim initially raised hopes that Timothy had been found. However, DNA testing quickly revealed the individual was not Timothy, but a 23-year-old man named Brian Rinne with a history of criminal activities and deception. Notably, Rinne was sentenced to 2 years in prison for the hoax and the harm he inflicted on the Pitson family. Numerous theories have been proposed regarding Timothy's disappearance. The most optimistic theory is that Amy gave Timothy to someone she trusted, as she claimed in her note. This would mean Timothy might still be alive, living under a different identity. However, skeptics argue that it would be nearly impossible to keep such an arrangement secret for so long, especially with the widespread publicity surrounding the case. That said, others argue that there are numerous cases of parental abductions where children live their life under an assumed identity for decades. Some theorize that Amy may have given Timothy to individuals who were under the belief that Timothy would be endangered if he was returned to his father. Another theory is that Amy may have ended Timothy, though there's no significant evidence to indicate this is the case. Others suggest that Amy might have left Timothy in a remote location where he succumbed to the elements. This theory aligns with the lack of physical evidence and the extensive but fruitless searches in the areas Amy visited. Further, it provides an alternative theory as to why she visited such remote locations. Perhaps she wasn't trying to ping cell towers to throw off investigators. Rather, perhaps she was looking for a location to drop the boy off where he would never be found. Notably, his father, James Pitson, strongly believes his son's still alive. If he is, I have a feeling that one day Timothy will submit his DNA to a genetic testing agency and be in for the surprise of a lifetime. 17-year-old Kurt Sova lived at home with his parents in a working class neighborhood on the outskirts of Cleveland. He was a high school junior, the youngest of four brothers, and close with his mom and dad. According to his parents, Dorothy and Ken, Kurt wasn't the type to stir up trouble. He got along with neighbors, stayed out of trouble, and never caused problems at school. On Friday, October 23rd, 1981, Dorothy last saw her son in the late afternoon. He left the house and, just a block away, ran into his friend Sam. Sam mentioned a Halloween party scheduled for that evening, and the two boys decided to drop by. Kurt never returned home. Dorothy later recalled that Kurt rarely stayed out late without permission. If he was not home by 10 or 11 p.m., his parents always knew where he was. But that Friday, he simply vanished. By Saturday morning, worry had set in. Dorothy started calling Kurt's friends, while his father, Ken, searched familiar neighborhoods and hangouts, hoping to spot his son. As the hours passed with no sign of Kurt, their concern deepened. On Sunday, they filed a missing person report with the Cleveland police. Dorothy and her other sons blanketed the neighborhood with missing person flyers. Friends and family combed ravines, schoolyards, and even dumpsters, determined to find Kurt. Later that Sunday, Dorothy uncovered a potential lead. Kurt had supposedly attended a party in nearby Newburgh Heights on Friday night, less than 2 miles from their home. She immediately went to the duplex on Harvard Street, where the gathering had reportedly taken place. The tenant, Susan, was not home, and another woman who answered the door claimed that no party had ever taken place. However, she promised that Susan would call Dorothy. When Susan finally got in touch, she denied seeing Kurt and insisted no party had occurred. However, a pizza delivery man confronted by the Sovas confirmed that a party had indeed taken place that Friday night. Pressed again, and with this new knowledge, Susan finally admitted there had been a gathering and that Kurt had been there. More than a dozen people had stopped by, most older than Kurt, and many were strangers to him. According to Susan, Kurt had been drinking Everclear, an extremely strong liquor. Notably, his friends would later say that Kurt didn't have much of a history of drinking. Sam later explained that Kurt had grown clumsy and ill as the night wore on. Susan asked Sam to take Kurt outside for some air. Around 9:30 p.m., Sam led Kurt out the front door, then briefly went back inside to grab his jacket. When Sam returned, Kurt, who had been leaning against a fence, was gone. Sam searched the streets but found nothing, assuming Kurt had decided to walk home. On Monday, October 26th, two unsettling events occurred. First, a friend of Kurt's named David claimed to have seen Kurt walking with another boy less than a mile from the Sova home. As David pulled over to offer a ride, a van approached. Kurt shouted, "Franco," and both boys jumped into the van. David had no idea Kurt was missing at the time. Had he known, he might have followed that van. 2 days later, Kurt would be found dead. Also on Monday, a strange man appeared in the Sovas neighborhood. He entered a local record store, saw Kurt's missing person flyer, and made a very odd statement. "You might as well take it down. They're going to find him dead in 2 days. Nobody's going to know why he died." The next morning, before the store opened, the manager found flowers and a threatening note left by the stranger. "Roses are red, the sky is blue. They found him dead, and they'll find you too." Terrified, she informed the police. They questioned the man, describing him as a quote-unquote crazy person from Detroit, and then released him. Since Kurt was still just considered missing at that time, there was no basis to hold him. After Kurt's body surfaced, the police attempted to track down the individual, but he had disappeared. But trust me, this story gets much weirder still. In the early morning hours of Wednesday, October 28th, around 3:30 a.m., Susan phoned Dorothy. She claimed someone was sleeping in her basement and suggested it might be Kurt. Although Susan had previously lied, Dorothy and Ken felt they had no choice but to investigate. Ken went to the duplex and searched the basement. He found a cot that had clearly been slept in, yet there was no one there. Ken couldn't say for sure if Kurt had ever slept on that cot, but he believed someone had. Dorothy later suspected that Kurt might have been alive, or perhaps dead or dying on that cot. She theorized that partygoers could have panicked and later dumped his body in a nearby ravine. Just hours after Susan's troubling call, on Wednesday, October 28th, three young boys made a chilling discovery. In a shallow ravine behind a warehouse on Harvard Street, about 500 yards from the duplex, they found Kurt's body lying face up in a small puddle. Apart from minor scratches and bruises, he bore no obvious signs of injury. One of his tennis shoes was lodged in a pile of rocks about 12 feet away, and the other shoe was missing entirely. The authorities confirmed it was Kurt within hours. An autopsy revealed he had died roughly 24 to 36 hours before being found. This meant he had likely survived for at least 3 days after he first vanished, yet he had been missing for a total of 5 days. The coroner's office could not determine a definitive cause of death. Kurt had not been beaten, had no lethal injuries, no fatal blood alcohol level, no hard substances in his system, and no pre-existing conditions. It was officially ruled probable accidental, though the exact cause remained unknown. Dorothy and Ken struggled to accept that the coroner's office could not provide a clear cause of death. As the shock faded, Dorothy began piecing together the bizarre events of those missing days. She and Ken both agreed that Kurt's body had not been in the ravine just 24 hours earlier. Ken had searched the area himself and would have noticed Kurt's bright yellow t-shirt. This strongly suggested that someone had placed Kurt's body there shortly before it was discovered. So, Kurt Sova's story is one of the cases that inspired me to get into unsolved mysteries, and I would really like to see a definitive resolution to this one day. Sadly, Kurt's parents have since passed away, but his brother Kevin remains committed to keeping his memory alive and his case in people's minds. If you have any information about Kurt Sova, please contact the Newburgh Heights Police Department. Hey everyone, quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share the video. Or, hey, if you dislike it, there's a button for that too. I'm not your boss. Now let's get back to business. Lame Johnny, born Cornelius Donahue around 1850 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, led a life of an Old West outlaw. He attended Girard College, an institution for impoverished and orphaned boys, from 1862 to 1872, where he excelled academically and in conduct. Despite this foundation, Donahue's ventures into legitimate professions faltered, leading him into a life of crime. After an unsuccessful stint as a cowboy in Texas, Donahue moved to the Black Hills in 1876, drawn by the gold rush. Also, as a quick aside, during his time in Texas, there were rumors that he engaged in cattle rustling, as was quite common at the time. Keep this in mind, because it'll be important. He prospected along Castle Creek and briefly served as a deputy in Custer County and as a bookkeeper for the Homestake Mining Company. However, his past caught up with him when a Texan recognized him as a horse thief, resulting in his dismissal. Subsequently, Donahue, now known as Lame Johnny due to a pronounced limp, formed a gang that engaged in horse theft, cattle rustling, and stagecoach robberies. Also, yeah, that's just about the most stereotypical resume for a Wild West outlaw, isn't it? The most infamous crime attributed to Lame Johnny's gang occurred on September 26th, 1878. They ambushed the Monitor, an armored stagecoach transporting valuables from the Homestake mine at Canyon Springs Station. The gang secured approximately $3,500 in cash, $500 in diamonds, and 700 pounds of gold dust, nuggets, and bullion. And to give you some sense of just how big this score was for Lame Johnny's crew, 700 pounds of gold today is worth just shy of $30 million. This heist significantly impacted the region, prompting intense efforts to apprehend the culprits and recover the stolen goods. In July 1879, authorities captured Lame Johnny near the Pine Ridge Reservation. While transporting him to Deadwood for trial, a masked vigilante mob intercepted the stagecoach near Buffalo Gap in the Dakota Territory. They demanded to know the location of the hidden treasure. When Johnny's responses proved unsatisfactory, the mob forcibly removed him from the coach and hanged him from a nearby elm tree, leaving his body shackled. The legend of Lame Johnny's lost treasure persists, with many believing that a portion of the stolen gold remains hidden in the Black Hills. Despite various searches over the years, the exact location of the treasure has never been discovered, leaving it an enduring mystery and a tantalizing lure for treasure hunters. Also, just to add in my own personal thoughts on this one, I'm not quite sure how this hasn't ever been made into a movie or a limited series. And yeah, of course, the real mystery here is how a guy named Cornelius ends up getting nicknamed Johnny. The Plague of Athens, which broke out during the second year of the Peloponnesian War in 429 BC, stands as one of the most devastating epidemics to hit the ancient Greek world. It emerged in a city already under tremendous strain from a protracted conflict with Sparta, and it proceeded to kill a substantial portion of the Athenian population. As the disease ran rampant through the overcrowded city, it not only shattered the social fabric of Athens, but also dealt a crippling blow to the city's military and political fortunes. Prior to the outbreak, Athens and Sparta had been locked in a bitter struggle, with Athens relying on its naval power and the security of its fortified city walls to fend off Spartan land forces. With the countryside left abandoned so that the population could take refuge behind the city's walls, Athens had become extremely densely crowded. Poor sanitary conditions, coupled with the influx of refugees, created an ideal breeding ground for disease. It's not surprising that when the plague struck, it spread rapidly. Simply put, the city of Athens was a tinderbox, and the plague was the match that set it all ablaze. The timing was disastrous. The Athenians were banking on their strong naval presence to supply the city, so the Spartan armies ravaging of the surrounding farmland didn't force a capitulation. Yet instead of famine or enemy swords, a microscopic foe made the city buckle. Thucydides, the great Athenian general and historian, documented the plague extensively in his work, History of the Peloponnesian War. He didn't just record political and military developments, he also carefully described the symptoms and social consequences of the outbreak. Many historians and physicians have turned to Thucydides' account in an attempt to identify the plague's exact cause. According to him, victims suffered sudden severe fever, redness and inflammation of the eyes, and a bloody throat and tongue. They developed foul breath, violent sneezing and coughing, followed by chest pain and severe gastrointestinal problems. Thucydides noted that those who survived often lost their fingers, toes, or eyesight, and became immune if exposed again. Such detailed observations, while invaluable, haven't provided a definitive answer for what this plague actually was. Over the centuries, suggestions have ranged from typhus to typhoid fever, smallpox, measles, or even hemorrhagic fever. Modern DNA analysis has helped narrow some possibilities. In 1994, excavations of a mass grave in a cemetery in Athens uncovered teeth that were tested for pathogens. Scholars thought they had found genetic evidence pointing to typhoid fever, but subsequent analysis led to controversy, and no unanimous conclusion has been reached. The debate continues, reflecting just how challenging it can be to retroactively diagnose an ancient disease based on historical descriptions and incomplete archaeological evidence. Still, the leading hypothesis for many researchers remains typhoid fever, which is consistent with Thucydides' descriptions, especially given the sanitary conditions in besieged Athens. What isn't in doubt is the scale of the disaster. Estimates vary, but it's believed that the plague killed anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the city's population. This had profound social and political repercussions. Athens at the time relied heavily on its navy and on its democratic institutions. With so many citizens and rowers either dead or weakened, not only did the city's military capabilities suffer, but public morale plummeted. Ancient sources recount the breakdown of traditional religious and social norms. Many Athenians believed their gods had abandoned them, while according to Thucydides, others used the chaos as an opportunity to plunder and pursue personal gain. One of the most notable casualties of the plague was the great statesman Pericles. Under his leadership, Athens had flourished, building monumental structures like the Parthenon and achieving a golden age of philosophy, drama, and democracy. Pericles was also the architect of Athens' grand strategy in the Peloponnesian War. He chose to bring the countryside's inhabitants into the city and let Sparta ravage the land, rather than engage directly in a land battle that played to Spartan strengths. While this strategy may have been sound in purely military terms, it inadvertently created the conditions that facilitated the spread of the plague. His death not only deprived the city of a visionary leader, but also thrust Athens into a leadership crisis. Subsequent leaders couldn't match Pericles' prestige or political skill, and the city's policy became more erratic, contributing to internal divisions and ill-fated military ventures. The psychological toll was also immense. Thucydides described an atmosphere of fear and fatalism, as many believed death was inevitable once symptoms appeared. Funeral rites became impossible to carry out as usual, and bodies were thrown onto pyres or left unburied in many cases. Notably, traditional Greek religion centered on proper burial rites to honor the dead and maintain favor with the gods. The inability to perform these rites shook people's faith and cultural identity, leaving them feeling untethered from the values and rituals that had long defined their community. In terms of historical significance, the plague of Athens can't be overlooked as a turning point in the Peloponnesian War. Initially, Athens had enjoyed a strategic advantage. Its walls and navy provided security and allowed for a focus on maritime power. However, after the plague, the morale and manpower of the city were severely diminished. Although the war dragged on for decades after, Athens never fully recovered the confidence and cohesion it had shown in the war's early years. The plague of Athens also contributed to a change in ethical thinking at the time. Athens was, as you may know, a great intellectual and cultural center of the ancient world. Faced with mass mortality and the breakdown of norms, people began to question the justness of the gods and the reliability of traditional moral codes. Thucydides noted a collapse of law and order as those who believed they had little time left tried to enjoy every pleasure before succumbing to illness. This crisis of faith and ethics paved the way for philosophical inquiries that would dominate Greek thought for centuries to come. The Sophists, for instance, emerged with skepticism toward traditional values, and, in turn, thinkers like Socrates grappled with defining virtue in a world where conventional morality seemed to fail so easily. The Burger Chef slayings remain one of the most haunting and perplexing unsolved homicide cases in Indiana's history. In November 1978, four young employees disappeared from a Burger Chef fast food restaurant in Speedway, a small suburban town just outside Indianapolis. Despite extensive investigations and recurring attempts to identify and prosecute the killers, law enforcement agencies never managed to bring the perpetrators to justice. The story began on the evening of November 17th, 1978, when four Burger Chef employees vanished from the restaurant. The victims were 20-year-old assistant manager Jane Freet, 17-year-old Ruth Shelton, and two 16-year-olds, Daniel Davis and Mark Flemons. And I'm going to mention something now, which may seem unusual, but keep this in mind because it'll likely lead to you being increasingly pissed off. These were hard-working young people with no criminal records or any accusations of theft or dishonesty ever. Keep this in mind. That night, the Burger Chef location closed as usual, but when a fellow employee arrived later, the place was deserted. The back door was left open, personal belongings were scattered in odd places, and a relatively small amount of cash, later found to be $581, was missing from the safe. Initially, the Speedway Police Department assumed the situation was a case of petty theft, and that the missing staff members had simply run off with the money. This crucial early misinterpretation led the authorities to delay treating the scene as a crime scene. In those critical early hours, the restaurant was cleaned and reopened the following day, effectively destroying potential physical evidence that could have guided the investigation. 2 days later, on November 19th, hikers discovered the bodies of all four missing employees in a remote wooded area near Johnson County, roughly 20 miles from the restaurant. The way the victims were killed only deepened the mystery. Ruth Shelton and Daniel Davis had been shot execution style multiple times with a .38 caliber weapon. Jane Freet had been stabbed twice in the chest. Mark Flemons had suffered a blunt force injury to the head. The sheer brutality and seemingly senseless nature of the slayings shocked the community. Investigators theorized that what began as a simple robbery turned into a kidnapping and quadruple slaying when the perpetrators realized they could be identified by their victims. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, local and state law enforcement, assisted by the FBI, mobilized in one of the largest manhunts central Indiana had ever seen. Yet, despite the urgency, key missteps had already hampered the investigation. Because the crime scene at the Burger Chef had not been preserved or treated as a potential serious crime scene, critical forensic evidence was almost certainly lost. Police at first had confidence they could solve the crime quickly, but the lack of physical evidence and reliable eyewitness accounts presented significant hurdles. In my view, the brutal Burger Chef slayings won't ever see a proper resolution. Too much time has passed, and investigators blew their best shot in those critical early hours. Much of the key evidence was basically cleaned up and tossed in the dumpster the morning after the kidnapping. This was based on the theory that four teenagers with no criminal records or any apparent history of accusations of theft all colluded to steal a relatively minor sum of money. We're looking at a decades-old tragedy that was mishandled from the start, and there's no undoing that now. Authorities could ramp up new investigations, tap the latest forensic tech, roll out fresh appeals to the public, and hope someone coughs up a memory they've kept bottled for 40 years. But given the fundamental gaps created when investigators were still reading this situation as a teen heist gone wrong, there's simply no solid foundation to build on. The truth likely won't ever be confirmed in a court of law or anywhere else. Instead, this will remain a painful mystery, defined not only by cruelty, but also by the early missteps that squandered the best chance at justice. And yeah, as you might be able to tell, this case really pisses me off since the police stereotyping four hardworking teens as petty criminals allowed the perpetrator or perpetrators to live free. On April 18, 1961, Joe Simonton, a chicken farmer from Eagle River, Wisconsin, claimed he had a close encounter that involved not just meeting extraterrestrials, but also being served pancakes by them. According to Simonton, at approximately 11 a.m., he witnessed an unidentified flying object descending onto his property. The craft was described as silvery, resembling two inverted bowls stacked together with exhaust pipes along the edge. Intrigued by the craft, Simonton approached it and was greeted by three beings. These creatures, about 5 feet tall, wore dark, tight fitting clothing, including helmets. What struck Simonton as particularly odd was their apparent human like features. He described them as looking quote unquote Italian, with olive skin and dark hair. Despite the surreal situation, the interaction between Simonton and the extraterrestrials seemed surprisingly mundane. One of the beings handed him a metallic container, gesturing that they needed water. Simonton, being a good host, filled the container and returned it to his alien guests. When Simonton handed over the water, one of the aliens began cooking on a flameless grill inside the craft. To his astonishment, the extraterrestrial handed him 3 pancakes. Later, these pancakes were sent for analysis by the United States Air Force as part of a broader investigation. The tests revealed that the pancakes were made from ordinary ingredients. The incident was ultimately labeled as unexplained by J. Allen Hynek, who investigated the case as part of Project Blue Book. Simonton's account quickly garnered media attention, and his story became one of the most unusual in UFO lore. While many reports focused on the bizarre nature of aliens serving pancakes, Simonton himself remained consistent in his narrative, despite the skepticism he faced. Interestingly, he kept one of the pancakes as a souvenir, which was later subjected to more scrutiny by scientists. And if you want to see what sort of pancakes aliens can make, you'll want to look on your screen right about now. Beyond the pancake analysis, investigators noted that Simonton appeared sincere, even if the overall scenario seemed implausible. Hynek, who had visited Simonton personally, noted that the farmer seemed genuinely convinced of the encounter's authenticity, though Hynek himself stopped short of offering any specific conclusions. Peter Ivers was a gifted musician, songwriter, and television host, and was a central figure in the emerging Los Angeles new wave scene of the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was best known as the host of New Wave Theater, a cutting-edge music and performance show that aired locally and then nationally via the USA Network's late-night series, Night Flight. Ivers championed underground artists and visionary filmmakers, forging connections that brought him into contact with some of the most innovative creative minds of his time. Yet despite his influence, the nightmarish violence that ended his life on March 3, 1983, in a downtown Los Angeles loft, has never been fully explained. Ivers was born on September 20th, 1946, in Boston, Massachusetts. An intellectually curious and musically gifted child, he excelled at Harvard University, where he explored a variety of creative musical and film-related endeavors. After graduating, he found himself at the intersection of music, film, and television production, gradually making a name within the close-knit creative scenes of both coasts. In the mid-1970s, he befriended rising filmmaker David Lynch, eventually contributing tracks to Lynch's landmark 1977 film Eraserhead. By the late 1970s, Ivers' presence in Los Angeles was notable. He'd introduce obscure bands, challenge viewers with strange and insightful monologues, and engage with the audience in a manner that felt remarkably ahead of its time, according to contemporaries. The show's format, short, frenetic, and stylistically daring, anticipated the coming MTV revolution by presenting music less as a polished product and more as a raw, creative explosion. It was therefore a tremendous shock when, on the morning of March 3rd, 1983, Peter Ivers was found bludgeoned to death in his Los Angeles loft. The scene was gruesome and chaotic. According to later accounts, friends, alarmed when Ivers failed to show up for a meeting, arrived at his residence in the city's gritty downtown area. One of those who discovered his body was film producer Lucy Fisher, who had come by that morning and made the horrifying discovery, along with other concerned colleagues. The loft, located near LA's notorious Skid Row, was not secured by the police immediately. In the hours after the killing, numerous people, including acquaintances, came and went through the crime scene before it was sealed, potentially contaminating evidence. This made a clean investigative process all but impossible. This initial mishandling of the crime scene was a major factor in the subsequent lack of progress in the case. The LAPD had difficulty reconstructing the final hours of Ivers's life and identifying suspects. Over the years, various theories emerged, ranging from a possible burglary gone wrong to more personal motives tied to the entertainment community or those in Ivers's orbit. Perhaps the most prominent theory is that a Canadian associate of the Rolling Stones named David Jove was somehow involved. Jove had allegedly been involved in dealing substances, and some have speculated that this led to a conflict. Personally, in my review of the evidence on this case, there seems like no reason to support that he was involved in the slaying whatsoever. Simply put, he was a shady guy who had some association with Ivers, and the rumor mill did the rest of the work. At any rate, the police never filed charges against anyone, and no solid leads that the public is aware of ever coalesced into an arrest. The personal nature of the killing, death by blunt force trauma, likely with a hammer, initially led some to suspect it might have been someone close to Ivers. There have been periodic calls over the years for the LAPD to reinvestigate the case, applying modern forensic methods to whatever evidence might remain. However, without a new witness coming forward, or a surprising bit of overlooked evidence surfacing, solving the crime seems less and less likely. In 2005, the sleepy town of Cape Elizabeth, Maine, became the center of a chilling mystery involving a figure known as the Cape Intruder. Cape Elizabeth, located along Maine's picturesque coastline, is celebrated for its serene landscapes and historic lighthouses, such as the Portland Headlight, the state's oldest. The town's peaceful reputation was upended when, beginning in August 2005, several residents reported nocturnal encounters with an unknown man inside their homes. These incidents typically involved the intruder standing over sleeping individuals, fleeing immediately upon their awakening. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, theft, or physical harm, leading authorities to believe the intruder targeted homes with unlocked doors or windows. The intruder was generally described as a young male in his 20s. Despite multiple eyewitness accounts, the police were unable to apprehend the suspect. A composite sketch was released to the public, and while some community members provided potential leads, including 2 victims naming the same individual, no arrests were made. The intrusions ceased abruptly in February 2006, and the identity of the Cape Intruder remains unknown. The Cape Intruder case highlights the vulnerabilities of small, high-trust communities like Cape Elizabeth, where residents often feel secure enough to leave doors and windows unlocked. Such environments foster a sense of safety, but can also create opportunities for individuals with malicious intent. Though the intruder caused no physical harm or theft, his actions could have escalated. Was his intent voyeuristic, or was he testing boundaries for something more sinister? The absence of theft raises some seriously unsettling questions about psychological motives. After leaving a bar on Philadelphia's South Street on February 19th, 2005, Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. vanished without a trace, along with Richard's black Dodge Dakota pickup truck. Despite extensive searches and investigations by law enforcement agencies, no sign of the pair has ever been found. Danielle Imbo, a 34-year-old from Mount Laurel, New Jersey, was a devoted mother to her 18-month-old son. At the time of her disappearance, Danielle was separated from her husband, Joe Imbo, though the two are reported to have maintained a good co-parental relationship for the sake of their son. Richard Petrone Jr., a 35-year-old Philadelphia resident, was also a parent. He had a teenage daughter from a previous relationship and worked at his family's bakery in South Philly. The two had an on-again, off-again romantic relationship, which was rekindled in the months leading up to their disappearance. On the evening of February 19th, Danielle and Richard met another couple for drinks at Abilene's, a bar and restaurant on Philadelphia's South Street, a popular area for nightlife. Friends and family later reported that the night was uneventful, with no indication of trouble or conflict. Danielle and Richard left the bar around 11:45 p.m., intending to return to Danielle's home in Mount Laurel. Richard was driving his black 2001 Dodge Dakota pickup truck. The drive from South Street to Mount Laurel was relatively short, and the couple was expected to arrive home soon after leaving. However, they never made it. When Danielle and Richard failed to return home or contact their families, loved ones quickly grew alarmed. Danielle's family contacted the police the following morning to report her missing. Police immediately launched a search for the couple, focusing on the areas between Philadelphia and Mount Laurel. Despite their efforts, there was no trace of Danielle, Richard, or Richard's truck. Searches of nearby waterways and highways, as well as extensive canvassing of the route they were believed to have taken, yielded no clues. Law enforcement agencies, including the Philadelphia Police Department, New Jersey State Police, and the FBI, were eventually involved in the investigation. Several theories have emerged over the years regarding what might have happened to Danielle and Richard. Some speculated that the couple may have been victims of a carjacking or robbery gone wrong. Another theory is that Danielle or Richard may have been targeted for personal reasons. In the months before her disappearance, Danielle had been finalizing her separation from her husband, Joe Imbo. However, no evidence has surfaced to implicate him or anyone else in their disappearance. Similarly, investigators looked into whether Richard might have had any enemies, but nothing substantial was uncovered. Investigators also considered the possibility of an accident, such as the truck veering off the road into a body of water. Yet repeated searches of waterways in the region have found no evidence of their vehicle or bodies. That said, there's simply too many bodies of water to search, and Richard's vehicle could easily be found in one of them. Most interestingly, though, the FBI released a statement that the couple may have been targeted by a paid professional. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Richard Petrone or Danielle Imbo, please contact the Philadelphia Police Department. The universe is a vast and mysterious expanse, filled with wonders that challenge our understanding of reality. Among the many enigmas it holds, one stands out as particularly elusive: dark matter. This invisible, untouchable substance makes up roughly 30% of the universe, yet its nature remains shrouded in mystery. Scientists can't see or interact with it directly, but its gravitational pull leaves undeniable traces on the cosmos. Early proponents of the basic idea of dark matter observed, starting in the late 19th century, that the universe must have more mass than it appears to have through conventional observation. In the early 1930s, Swiss astronomer Fritz Zwicky was studying the Coma Cluster, a large collection of galaxies swirling through space. Using estimates of the visible stars and gas in the cluster, Zwicky calculated its total mass and compared it to the speed at which the galaxies were moving. To his astonishment, he found that the galaxies were traveling so fast that they should have flown apart if the visible matter were all there was. Zwicky proposed the existence of an invisible form of matter to explain the missing gravitational force. At the time, his idea was met with skepticism. The tools and observations available weren't sophisticated enough to confirm or refute his claims, leaving the concept of dark matter as little more than a curiosity for decades. Nevertheless, Zwicky's work laid the groundwork for one of the most significant scientific puzzles of the 20th and 21st centuries. Dark matter's existence isn't just inferred from the motion of galaxies, it's also observed through the bending of light. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, massive objects like galaxies and clusters warp the fabric of space-time, causing light to bend as it travels through these regions. This phenomenon, called gravitational lensing, provides a unique way to quote-unquote see dark matter. To understand the true scale of dark matter's role in the universe, we must look back to its infancy. The cosmic microwave background, or CMB, is a faint glow of radiation left over from the Big Bang, and it carries imprints of the universe's early conditions. According to astrophysicists, the patterns in the CMB can only be explained if dark matter was present during this early period, pulling ordinary matter into clumps through its gravitational influence. Even though the evidence for dark matter is overwhelming, its true nature remains one of the biggest mysteries in science. Scientists don't yet know exactly what dark matter is, but they have some hypotheses. It might be made up of tiny particles, such as weakly interacting massive particles, commonly called WIMPs, which interact so weakly with ordinary matter that they're nearly impossible to detect. Another possibility is axions, incredibly lightweight particles that might solve other mysteries in physics too. Some theorists also propose that there's a significant chance that it's made of something we haven't discovered yet, hence why we're unable to observe it directly. Numerology, the study of the mystical significance of numbers, has roots reaching back thousands of years. This idea has evolved through ancient civilizations, with notable contributions from Greek, Egyptian, and Chinese cultures. Though viewed by some as pseudoscientific, the practice persists as a means of exploring identity, destiny, and universal truths. The origins of numerology can be traced to the early civilizations of Babylon and Egypt, where the symbolic significance of numbers was integrated into their respective belief systems. However, it was the ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, around the 6th century BC, who is most often credited with founding modern Western numerological practices. Pythagoras is said to have believed that numbers constitute the essential building blocks of the universe, governing both physical forms and spiritual dimensions. His notion that everything is arranged according to number highlighted his belief that numbers contained fundamental truths about the world. Pythagoras and his followers, known as the Pythagoreans, focused on what they saw as the vibrational qualities of numbers, believing that numbers could reveal both individual and universal secrets. In Pythagorean numerology, each number from 1 to 9 carries specific characteristics. The number 1, for instance, symbolizes unity and creation, while 2 represents duality and balance. By examining a person's name or birth date, numerologists would reduce these numbers through a process called reduction to arrive at a single-digit core number. This final number was thought to reveal important aspects of a person's character and fate. The Greeks were not alone in their numerological interests. Similar ideas existed in other ancient cultures, including the Chinese, who developed their own numerological system as part of the I Ching. In Chinese numerology, numbers also possess intrinsic meanings tied to yin and yang, and specific numbers were considered auspicious or inauspicious. For example, the number 8 is considered highly favorable because its pronunciation sounds like the word for wealth, whereas the number 4 is often avoided because it sounds like death. The Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, which dates back to the 1st century AD at least, incorporates numerology as a method for interpreting sacred texts. The system of gematria, a key part of Kabbalistic numerology, assigns numerical values to letters in the Hebrew alphabet, allowing practitioners to analyze texts and uncover hidden messages. For example, the Hebrew word for life has a numerical value of 18, making this number significant in Jewish tradition. Despite its widespread historical use, numerology lacks scientific validation and is often categorized alongside other metaphysical practices. Its adherents argue that the insights it offers are based on spiritual principles rather than empirical evidence, making it more akin to astrology or divination than hard science. Nevertheless, numerology's symbolic language continues to captivate individuals seeking a structured, meaningful approach to understanding their lives and purpose. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Now back to business. The Klagefrau, translating to wailing woman in German, is a spectral figure in German folklore, akin to the Irish banshee. Her mournful cries are believed to foretell imminent death or disaster, casting a shadow of dread over those who hear her lamentations. The concept of the Klagefrau has deep roots in Germanic traditions, with references dating back to the 15th century. Initially, the term was associated with owls, creatures often linked to omens and the supernatural. Over time, the Klagefrau evolved into a more anthropomorphic entity, embodying the sorrow and forewarning of death. In various German regions, the Klagefrau is known by different names, each reflecting local interpretations. The Klagefrau is typically depicted as an ethereal, often invisible figure whose presence is marked by her haunting wails. Her cries are said to cause those who hear them to break the nerves of those who hear her, reflecting the profound psychological impact of her presence. She is usually active at midnight, floating near homes without entering them. The nature of this spectral creature varies across the German-speaking world, with too many slight regional variants to list here, but I'll give a couple of examples. In Austria, she is considered the soul of a deceased individual, while in Saxony, she is thought to be the soul of an unlucky mother searching for her drowned son. While belief in the Klagefrau has waned in contemporary times, she remains a compelling figure in German folklore. Didi Rosenthal, a 32-year-old therapist from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, vanished under mysterious circumstances, leading to an investigation that would eventually connect to another heinous crime. On February 22, 1991, Didi Rosenthal was last seen at her apartment in Cherry Hill. She worked as a therapist at the Elwyn Institute in Vineland, New Jersey, approximately 40 miles from her home. When she failed to report to work, her concerned co-workers reported her missing on February 27th. Authorities found her apartment undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Personal belongings, including her car keys and appointment book, were left behind, and her car remained parked outside. Despite extensive searches, no immediate leads emerged, and the case grew cold. The investigation took a significant turn in October 1995, following the brutal slaying of 43-year-old Rebecca Wirtz in Burlington Township, New Jersey. Authorities quickly arrested Eddie Reddish Jr., Wirtz's boyfriend, for the crime. Also, quick aside, this guy was apparently known to the authorities as Crazy Eddie Reddish, which I suppose was probably a major tip-off. During interrogation, Reddish confessed not only to Wirtz's slaying, but also to the ending of Dee Dee Rosenthal. He revealed that he had been a maintenance worker at Rosenthal's apartment complex in 1991. According to his confession, he entered her apartment through an unlocked sliding door, intending to burglarize it. When Rosenthal awoke and screamed, Reddish smothered her to death. He later disposed of her body in a wooded area in Salem County, New Jersey. Despite searches, Rosenthal's remains were never recovered. In December 1998, Reddish was convicted of Wirtz's slaying and received a 55-year-to-life sentence. Subsequently, he was charged with Rosenthal's slaying. Initially, Reddish reached a plea agreement, pleading guilty to manslaughter on the condition that he lead authorities to Rosenthal's remains. When he failed to do so, the deal was revoked, and he was recharged with capital slaying. In 2002, Reddish was convicted of Rosenthal's slaying and sentenced to death. However, after New Jersey abolished the death penalty, his sentence was commuted to 60 years in prison. He remains incarcerated at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton with parole eligibility in, 2080. Unfortunately, Dee Dee's final resting place remains an unsolved mystery for the time being, and at this point I don't see that Reddish has any real incentive to cooperate further. That said, stranger things have happened, and even though he's an irredeemably evil individual, trust me, I haven't even scratched the surface of the horrors of his crimes. There's always the chance that he may want to take the opportunity to clear his conscience. The Hand of Glory is a dark artifact rooted in European folklore, particularly associated with thieves and dark magic. Traditionally, it's the preserved hand of a hanged criminal, often the left hand, or the hand that did the deed, if the individual roped for slaying another. This gruesome talisman was believed to possess supernatural powers, especially when combined with a candle made from the fat of the same executed person. The hand would then serve as a candlestick for a candle made from the fat of the same individual, with the wick crafted from his hair. When lit, the Hand of Glory was said to render all within its presence motionless, facilitating undisturbed theft. Further, the artifact was said to be able to assist with picking any lock, but again only when lit. The process of creating a Hand of Glory was intricate and steeped in ritual. According to an 18th century grimoire, the hand had to be cut from the body of a hanged man, wrapped in a piece of funeral wrapping, and squeezed to remove any remaining blood. It was then placed in an earthenware vessel containing a mixture of salt, saltpeter, and pepper, left for a fortnight, and subsequently dried in the sun during the hottest days of summer. The only surviving examples of a Hand of Glory is housed in the Whitby Museum in North Yorkshire, in England. Discovered in the early 20th century, hidden within the wall of a thatched cottage in Castleton, it was identified by a local historian. The museum describes it as a mummified human hand, believed to be the only known example of its kind. Notably, the reason why this occult artifact may sound familiar to many of you is due to Harry Potter. In this series, it's depicted as a magical object that provides light only to the holder, leaving others in darkness. This portrayal aligns with traditional beliefs about the hand's ability to aid thieves by confounding their victims. Dulce Maria Alaves, born on April 25, 2014, in Bridgeton, New Jersey, was a happy 5-year-old girl whose sudden disappearance on September 16, 2019, shocked the nation. On that fateful afternoon, Dulce accompanied her mother, Noema Alaves Perez, her 3-year-old brother, and another child to Bridgeton City Park. While the children played on the swings, Noema, who was pregnant at the time, remained in her car approximately 30 yards away. Between 4 and 5 p.m., Noema noticed Dulce was missing and found her brother crying alone near the swings. Despite immediate searches, Dulce was nowhere to be found. The investigation quickly mobilized over 30 law enforcement officers who scoured the nearby woods and park areas, but found no trace of Dulcie. Authorities described a potential suspect as a light-skinned Hispanic male, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, driving a red van. Despite extensive efforts, including national media coverage, no strong suspects have been identified. In February 2021, following leads, a search was conducted in Austintown, Ohio, but it did not yield any significant findings. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released age progression images depicting Dulcie as a 7-year-old, aiming to assist the public in recognizing her potential current appearance. An FBI special agent ominously noted, "The offender that took Dulcie was likely there for a period of time. It was a crime of opportunity. They were looking for a child, maybe their age or gender." If you have any information on the disappearance of Dulcie Maria Alvarez, please reach out to the FBI with any tips. In recent years, TikTok has emerged as a significant platform for the dissemination and popularization of witchcraft practices. This phenomenon, often referred to as witch talk, has garnered substantial attention, with hashtags like #witchcraft and #witchtalk amassing millions of views. TikTok's unique algorithm promotes content allowing niche communities to flourish. For modern witches, the platform offers a space to share rituals, spells, and personal experiences, fostering a sense of community and accessibility. Users on WitchTalk share a variety of content, including spell tutorials, where creators provide step-by-step guides on performing spells aimed at love, protection, and prosperity. These tutorials often include detailed instructions and demonstrations to assist viewers in practicing these rituals. Many videos also offer information on the properties and uses of different crystals. These educational posts help viewers understand how to incorporate crystals into their spiritual practices. Another common witch talk discussion area is herbal remedies for healing and magic. These videos explore the medicinal and mystical properties of herbs, providing viewers with knowledge on how to utilize them effectively. These practices are often presented in short, engaging videos that demystify complex rituals, making them approachable for newcomers and allowing videos to go viral quickly. The Witch Talk community is predominantly composed of younger individuals, in particularly younger millennials and Gen Z. This demographic shift aligns with a broader trend of declining participation in organized religion and a growing interest in alternative spiritualities. Despite its popularity, Witch Talk has faced criticism. Some practitioners argue that the platform's format oversimplifies complex traditions, leading to misinformation. They claim that Witch Talk often emphasizes aesthetic rituals, trendy spells, and beginner-friendly content designed to foster engagement rather than core understanding of concepts. Crucially, they argue it frequently overlooks the critical aspect of protective practices for spellcasters. Protective measures like shielding, warding, and cleansing, vital for safeguarding one's energy and space, are rarely highlighted in tutorials or discussions. This omission can leave novice practitioners vulnerable to unintended energetic consequences, such as psychic burnout or attracting negative influences. The platform's fast-paced, entertainment-driven nature tends to prioritize visually appealing content over comprehensive guidance, leaving a gap in education for those exploring witchcraft. According to some, while Witch Talk offers a creative and accessible introduction to magic, greater emphasis on foundational safety practices would better prepare users for their spiritual journeys. Additionally, the commodification of spiritual practices by witchfluencers has raised ethical concerns within the community. Reiki, originating from Japan in the early 20th century, is a form of energy healing that emphasizes the transfer of universal life energy through a practitioner's hands to promote well-being. The term Reiki combines two Japanese words, meaning something approximate to life energy. This practice is grounded in the belief that an unseen life force energy flows through all living beings, and disruptions or blockages in this energy can lead to illness or stress. By channeling this energy, Reiki aims to restore balance and support the body's natural healing processes. The development of Reiki is attributed to Mikao Usui, born in 1865 in Japan. Usui, who had some training as a Buddhist monk, had a deep interest in spiritual practices and healing methods. In the early 1920s, after a period of fasting and meditation on Mount Kurama, he reported experiencing a profound spiritual awakening that led to the development of the Reiki healing system. Usui began teaching this method, emphasizing self-healing and spiritual development. He established a clinic in Tokyo and trained over 2,000 students in his lifetime. After Usui's death in 1926, one of his prominent students, Chujiro Hayashi, continued to practice and teach Reiki. In the 1930s, Hawayo Takada, a Japanese-American woman, sought treatment from Hayashi's clinic in Japan for her health issues. Impressed by the results, she became a dedicated student and later a Reiki master. Takada introduced Reiki to the United States upon her return, establishing clinics and training practitioners across the country. Her efforts were instrumental in spreading Reiki throughout the Western world, and if you know someone who has done Reiki in the West, it's essentially due to her influence. A typical Reiki session involves the recipient lying fully clothed on a massage table, while the practitioner places their hands lightly on or just above specific areas of the body. These hand positions correspond to major organs and energy centers, commonly known as chakras. The practitioner holds each position for several minutes, allowing the flow of energy to address areas of need. Sessions usually last between 45 to 90 minutes, depending on the practitioner's approach and the client's needs. Some practitioners incorporate additional elements such as crystals or aromatherapy to enhance the experience. While many individuals report positive experiences with Reiki, including reduced stress and improved well-being, scientific research on its efficacy remains inconclusive. Check out my alternative channels, Lazy Chill True Crime and Lazy Chill History, for way more content. Or just stay on this channel and watch my entire Unsolved Mysteries series. It's about 60 hours long now. Gary DeVore was a Hollywood screenwriter best known for penning action films such as 1986's Raw Deal starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, as well as numerous other films. Born on September 17, 1941, he worked steadily in the entertainment industry, building relationships with prominent figures and working on projects that brought him into contact with Hollywood insiders. Yet despite his success, DeVore's name became more widely known not for his body of work, but for the mysterious circumstances surrounding his disappearance in 1997 and subsequent events. DeVore vanished on June 28, 1997, while driving from Santa Fe, New Mexico, back to his home in Los Angeles, California. He had been staying at a friend's house in Santa Fe working on a screenplay, and he set off late at night, presumably to avoid daytime traffic. Before leaving, DeVore called his wife, Wendy, from his car's phone at around 1:15 a.m. to say he was on his way. That was the last known communication from him, and when he failed to arrive in Los Angeles the following day, concern mounted, and a missing persons report was filed. The days and weeks following Gary DeVore's disappearance saw much attention focused on the route he might have taken while driving from Santa Fe, New Mexico, back to Los Angeles. Since he was no stranger to the trip, he had a history of traveling between these two locations. Friends and family assumed he would stick to a well-known, logical path along major interstates. Typically, such a journey would involve taking Interstate 25 south from Santa Fe to join Interstate 40 westbound, a major artery that would carry him across Arizona and into California. Once in California, travelers heading into Los Angeles often transition off Interstate 40 near Barstow and navigate southward on highways toward the Los Angeles area. The exact configuration of roads can vary. Some choose Interstate 15, while others take smaller state highways. Then, on July 8, 1998, a California Department of Water Resources worker discovered a submerged Ford Explorer in the California aqueduct near Palmdale. Inside the Ford Explorer were skeletal remains later identified as those of Gary DeVore. This high desert area in Palmdale, where his car would eventually be found, is known for its long, isolated stretches of road and sparse lighting. Those familiar with the area note that late-night driving through these sections can be challenging, with minimal roadside assistance and landmarks. Although it initially seemed that the mystery would be solved, the circumstances surrounding his death only deepened the intrigue. The official conclusion was that DeVore's death resulted from a single car accident. According to investigators, he apparently drifted off the highway, through a fence, and into the aqueduct. Yet questions arose almost immediately. Some observers noted that the steering wheel and other car parts had unusual configurations, and there were claims that DeVore's hands were missing from the remains. This detail, while often cited, remains contentious, though the coroner's report indicates certain bones were missing. Regardless, the confusion fueled theories that the accident might have been staged, or that DeVore was eliminated for something he knew. One of the most persistent theories involves the screenplay DeVore was working on at the time of his death, tentatively titled The Big Steal. According to some accounts, the story dealt with the U.S. government's 1989 invasion of Panama and allegedly contained explosive revelations that could embarrass the ruling elite. Although these assertions remain speculative at this time, the notion that he had uncovered sensitive, even classified material has gained significant traction. Adding to the intrigue, DeVore's computer, containing drafts of the screenplay, disappeared, and friends later claimed that the version eventually found was missing crucial pages. Supporters of the conspiracy theory argue that the U.S. government, or some branch of it, was involved in DeVore's death to prevent the dissemination of this material. Critics of these claims point out that accidents are tragically common, especially on remote highways late at night. DeVore's journey took him through long stretches of desolate roads, and a moment of fatigue or distraction could easily have ended in catastrophe. The region around Palmdale, where DeVore's car was found, features treacherous conditions and minimal lighting. Additionally, coroners and law enforcement agencies maintain that their investigations were thorough and that no evidence supports the theory of foul play. While all these factors may be true, if DeVore was indeed missing his hands, and given that he was of course a writer, the symbolism and message is overwhelming. The Chair of Death is an infamous artifact linked to a series of mysterious deaths in North Yorkshire in England. In 1702, Thomas Busby, a local criminal involved in counterfeiting, killed his father-in-law, Daniel Audie, following a dispute. Convicted of the crime, Busby was sentenced to death by hanging. Legend holds that, en route to his execution, Busby cursed his favorite chair, declaring that anyone who sat in it would meet an untimely death. The chair remained in the Busby Stoop Inn, near Thirsk, for centuries. Over time, numerous deaths were attributed to those who dared sit in it. During World War II, for instance, Canadian airmen from a nearby base reportedly frequented the pub, and those who sat in the chair allegedly never returned from their missions. In another earlier account from 1894, a man who sat in the chair was found dead the next morning, hanging near the site of Busby's execution. Despite these tales, investigations have cast doubt on the chair's authenticity and the veracity of the curse. One expert who examined the chair noted that its components indicated post-industrial tools were used, suggesting the chair was crafted around 1840, long after Busby's death. This discrepancy raises questions about the chair's origins and the legitimacy of the associated legends. That said, while the chair may not have actually been involved as the original legend suggests, an accepted curse has built up around this specific chair in the years that followed. Some have theorized that the power of suggestion may lead individuals to attribute coincidental deaths to the curse, reinforcing the legend over time. Others have suggested that the tale of the cursed chair serves as a compelling narrative, evolving through retellings and becoming ingrained in local folklore. In this understanding, the events associated with the chair are in essence all embellished at best, or fabricated at worst. Of course, many also believe that the chair may have some sort of curse associated with it. The concept of cursed objects stems from the belief that items can absorb or harbor negative energy, often due to traumatic events or deliberate enchantments. Such objects are thought to bring misfortune, illness, or death to their owners or people who interact with the object in a certain way, such as sitting on this chair in this instance. Still others have speculated that the chair serves as a dark tourist attraction designed to bring curiosity seekers to see the chair. And let's be honest here, this isn't an entirely crazy theory, given that the chair was located in an inn named after the supposedly cursed chair. To prevent further chair-related mishaps, this evil chair was donated to the Thirsk Museum in 1978, where it's displayed suspended from the ceiling to deter anyone from sitting in it. This measure aims to preserve the artifact while mitigating the risk associated with its ominous reputation. My view on this unsolved mystery is that believing you've sat on a cursed chair might make you feel cursed because of the psychological power of suggestion. Fear triggers stress, leading to hasty decisions and generally ill health, which you'll likely attribute to the quote-unquote curse because you sat on the chair. Essentially, the real curse lies in how belief can shape reality, reinforcing the legend through self-fulfilling prophecy. All that said, I still wouldn't sit on the chair myself, just in case, because hey, I don't want to sit on any malevolent chairs. The Brabant Killers case is likely Belgium's most notorious unsolved criminal case for reasons which will soon become extremely obvious. This was a core gang of 3 men, known in the media as the Giant, the Killer, and the Old Man. Operating primarily in the 1980s, this gang carried out a series of armed robberies and slayings that terrorized Belgium's Brabant province and surrounding areas, leaving 28 people dead. What's particularly disturbing about these crimes isn't merely their brutality, but the lingering mystery surrounding the perpetrators' identities and motives. Decades after the last attack, investigators and the general public are still wondering why these men were so violent, how they managed to evade capture, and who might have been pulling the strings. The crimes attributed to the Brabant Killers occurred between 1982 and 1985, with the gang's activities mostly concentrated on supermarkets, restaurants, and stores. The gang members were known for their ruthless efficiency and their willingness to shoot anyone who stood in their way. Though robberies were at the core of their operations, the sheer level of violence, far exceeding what would be considered necessary to carry out a successful heist, set them apart. They gunned down innocent customers and employees, causing widespread panic and sparking one of the largest criminal investigations in Belgian history. The timeline of the Brabant Killers' attacks provides some insight into how their methods evolved and how law enforcement struggled to keep up. Their earliest known activities date back to 1982, when the group began targeting smaller shops and isolated businesses. Over time, they grew bolder, assaulting supermarkets belonging to the Del Hayes chain, well-known stores visited routinely by ordinary families. Attacks peaked in 1985 and then abruptly ceased, leaving a trail of dead bodies and traumatized communities. In total, the gang committed dozens of violent robberies. By the time the terror ended, 28 people had been killed, with the worst incidents occurring on the nights of their supermarket raids. The sudden stop in their activities in 1985 has led some to believe they either disbanded, died, or found themselves under too much scrutiny to continue. The modus operandi of the Brabant killers was both terrifying and perplexing. They often arrived at their chosen targets heavily armed, sometimes wearing disguises or masks that made them look almost paramilitary in nature. They worked with cold precision, and unlike many criminal gangs that simply want to generate income while drawing as little heat as possible, they seemed to relish in drawing attention. Witnesses recounted how the assailants laughed as they shot victims or fired indiscriminately into crowds. One of the reasons the Brabant killers case continues to fascinate and frustrate is the failure of law enforcement to apprehend the culprits. The Belgian police and federal investigators dedicated enormous resources to catching the gang, yet despite this, their efforts repeatedly hit dead ends. Physical evidence, such as bullets and cartridge casings, helped confirm that the same group was likely behind each attack, but did little to identify the perpetrators. Attempts to build a psychological profile of the killers also failed to yield concrete suspects. Confounding matters further, there were suggestions that some evidence was mishandled over the years, prompting speculation about incompetence or even corruption within the investigative teams. Many theorists have expressed the belief that the authorities either weren't able or willing to expose those responsible, potentially allowing the gang to continue their heinous actions. Theories have swirled around the identity and motives of the Brabant killers since the crimes began, and they haven't let up over the decades. Some have suggested that the gang was comprised of ordinary criminals who turned excessively violent, perhaps due to being substance-addled or psychologically disturbed. Others believe that these weren't ordinary thugs at all, but instead, they see the hand of far-right extremists or rogue elements within the Belgian security apparatus. Notably, many individuals within the Belgian police force thought that the tactics used by the three men were nearly identical to those taught to an elite gendarmerie unit. For those unfamiliar with this term, gendarmes are military units that act as law enforcement units in civilian contexts. I've sometimes heard them referred to as military police, but this isn't correct, as military police refers to military units assigned with enforcing military laws on non-civilians. A persistent theory posits that the Brabant killers were connected to right-wing stay-behind networks that were intended to launch guerrilla campaigns if the Soviets conquered Western Europe. The suggestion of a political or conspiratorial angle isn't entirely without precedent, as Operation Gladio was a real network of NATO-funded right-wing paramilitaries. Some commentators have linked the Brabant killers to these clandestine operations, arguing that the group's advanced tactics and brutality might have been honed in a paramilitary context. Others suspect that they were used, directly or indirectly, by political factions looking to cause fear and instability, possibly paving the way for more authoritarian measures. While these ideas remain speculative, the unsettling notion that state-linked actors could have been involved ensures that the Brabant killers case stays firmly in the realm of dark intrigue. Others have suggested that the extreme brutality and robberies were actually cover-ups for targeted hits, with most of the slain individuals being callously used as cover for the real target. Still, yet another speculative theory about this case involves extortion. As I mentioned earlier in this segment, their most common target was Delhaize grocery stores. Some have speculated that these attacks were an attempt to extort significant sums of money from the grocery store chain to prevent future attacks. A number of suspects and persons of interest have been named over the course of the last number of decades. One of the most prominent suspects was Madani Buhush, a former gendarme with far-right affiliations. Also, just a quick note on this guy. Despite his distinctly non-European name, he was really into the ideologies of a certain failed Austrian painter. Yeah, the same guy with that Charlie Chaplin-inspired mustache that this platform doesn't want me to mention. His expertise in weapons, his history of extreme violence, and connections to far-right groups led investigators to consider him a suspect in the Brabant killer's case. However, no definitive evidence linked him to the crimes, and he died in 2005. In 2017, reports emerged that former policeman Christian Bonkowski had confessed on his deathbed to being the Giant, one of the key figures in the gang. His brother confirmed the confession, stating that Bonkowski had admitted involvement shortly before his death. Despite this revelation, conclusive evidence tying him to the crimes was not established. However, it was later revealed that he had already been investigated under suspicion of being the Giant in 2000, and that DNA evidence had likely ruled him out. Personally, I don't think the Brabant killer's case will ever be solved, because it's a perfect storm of systemic failure and eroded evidence. In a case this complex, time is the enemy, and the original investigators appear to have lost or mishandled key evidence. But let's get back to the passage of time. Memories fade, witnesses pass away, and physical evidence deteriorates, rendering any remaining clues nearly useless. Notably, and I didn't mention this earlier, this case was formally closed in June 2024, indicating that the legal system had completely given up finding justice for the dozens of victims. Or perhaps it indicates that the crime has been solved, but that all participants are deceased. But then I have to question why the names wouldn't be released for closure for the victims' families. If this case is ever solved, I suspect it will be long after anyone who could ever be held accountable for the botched investigation could be held accountable in any way whatsoever. The God of Amiens, an enigmatic Gallo-Roman bronze statuette, is a fascinating relic of ancient cultural syncretism and spirituality. Its unique characteristics and uncertain identity have sparked numerous theories about its purpose and the deity it represents. The God of Amiens was discovered in October 1845 during construction work in the suburb of Saint-Fucien in Amiens. Excavators found it alongside Roman coins and a bronze spoon, suggesting a ritual context. The figure was subsequently donated to the Musée de Picardie, where it remains preserved. Its relatively intact condition allows for detailed analysis, although some aspects of the artifact, like its missing forearm and presumed original accessories, leave room for speculation. The statuette is very small and depicts a young male figure seated cross-legged, a pose reminiscent of meditation or spiritual contemplation. The figure is wearing a tunic and a cloak fastened at the right shoulder, garments consistent with Roman influence but often interpreted through a Celtic lens. The most striking feature of the statuette is its elongated right ear, protruding from curly hair, and its animalistic resemblance, likely mimicking a deer's ear. The figure's left hand is clenched, as if holding a missing object, hypothesized to be a bunch of grapes or a snake, two motifs with symbolic significance in both Roman and Celtic traditions. This statuette isn't unique in its general form or symbolism. Similar Gallo-Roman figures, such as the god of Besançon and the god of Lantilly, share features that suggest they belong to a specific tradition of religious art. These elements align closely with Celtic deities linked to nature, fertility, and transformation. In particular, the stag, a creature frequently depicted in Celtic mythology, suggests a connection to Cernunnos, a deity often referred to as the horned god. Cernunnos is a central figure in Celtic religion, associated with animals, nature, and the underworld. While no ancient texts directly describe his attributes, surviving imagery typically depicts him with antlers, seated in a cross-legged pose and interacting with animals. Scholars have posited that the elongated ear of the god of Amiens may substitute for antlers in this representation, symbolizing a less literal but similarly potent connection to deer and the wild. The exact purpose of the object is also open to debate. The statuette's small size and intricate detail indicate it may have served as a personal devotional object. In Gallo-Roman religious practices, individuals often dedicated small statues, coins, or other items to deities at sacred sites, seeking favor or expressing gratitude. The coins found alongside the god of Amiens support this theory, suggesting that the site of its discovery was a shrine or temple. Alternatively, the statue might have been part of a household altar. Many Gallo-Roman households included spaces dedicated to household gods or local deities. The god of Amiens, with its likely association with prosperity, would have been a fitting figure for domestic worship, providing spiritual protection and blessings for the household. Perhaps what makes the god of Amiens such a fascinating historical mystery is that there's just enough to piece together connections, but not enough to draw definitive conclusions. The missing right forearm and the presumed absence of the original accessories complicate efforts to definitively identify the deity. Was the elongated ear meant to symbolize a direct connection to Cernunnos? Or was it a stylistic feature with perhaps a more generalized meaning? Does the statuette even depict Cernunnos, or does it represent perhaps the only known depiction of a lost Celtic or Romano-Gallic deity? How did worshippers interpret the deity's role, and what rituals might have involved the statuette? These questions remain fascinating mysteries, especially for people like myself who feel a connection to Celtic mythology and legend, and wish that this lore had been better preserved.